Philosophy often seems like a long parade of famous thinkers, one following the other through history. You might start with Socrates, move on to Plato, then Aristotle, and continue down a long, winding road. While this approach teaches you what each person said, it can sometimes feel like memorizing a list of facts and dates. You learn about their individual systems, but you might miss the bigger picture. It is easy to get lost in the details of one philosopher's world without connecting their thoughts to broader, more enduring questions that have puzzled humanity for centuries. This method can make philosophy feel like a museum of finished ideas rather than a living, breathing conversation. But what if there was another way? Imagine, instead of walking down a single path, you could stand in the middle of a great hall and listen to many philosophers debating a single topic. This is the essence of what we call syntopic learning. The word syntopic simply means bringing different topics or ideas together. In philosophy, it means you start not with a person, but with a question. A big, fascinating question like, what is justice? Or do we have free will? You then invite thinkers from different eras and cultures to answer it. This way, philosophy transforms from a history lesson into an active, dynamic dialogue where you are the moderator. The real power of this approach lies in how it helps you understand and remember complex ideas. When you place one philosopher's view next to another's, you start to see the strengths and weaknesses in each argument more clearly. It's like looking at a sculpture from different angles. You get a much fuller, three-dimensional impression. Instead of just learning what Plato said, you learn how his ideas compare to, say, Confucius or Simone de Beauvoir. This comparative process forces your brain to work harder, to connect dots, and to build a mental map of the philosophical landscape. The ideas stick better because you have woven them into a rich tapestry of contrasting perspectives. So, this guide is an invitation to try this method for yourself. It's about more than just being a passive recipient of knowledge. It's about becoming an active participant in philosophical inquiry. You don't need to be an expert to begin. All you need is curiosity and a willingness to explore a question from multiple viewpoints. By doing so, you are not just learning about philosophy, you are learning to do philosophy. You are developing the critical skill of synthesis, which is the ability to take various pieces of information and build a coherent understanding from them. This is the first step toward building your own thoughtful and well-reasoned worldview. The first step in your syntopic journey is choosing a question that genuinely interests you. Philosophy is driven by curiosity, so pick something that makes you wonder. It could be a classic such as, what is truth? Or what makes an action morally right? Or it could be something more personal, like what is the nature of happiness? The key is to select a question that is broad enough to have been addressed by many thinkers, but specific enough to guide your research. Write this question down at the top of a page in a journal, or as the central bubble in a mind map. This will be your anchor throughout the process. Once you have your question, your next task is to assemble your panel of thinkers. The goal here is diversity. Don't just pick philosophers from ancient Greece or modern Europe. Try to include voices from different cultures, time periods, and schools of thought. For a question about morality, you might look at Aristotle from ancient Greece, Immanuel Kant from 18th century Germany, and perhaps a Buddhist philosopher from the East. This variety prevents you from getting stuck in one tradition and reveals how universal these questions truly are. You don't need to read their entire works. You can start with summaries, encyclopedia entries, or short essays to get a sense of their main arguments on your chosen topic. Now comes the organizational part, which is crucial for clarity. A simple table or a mind map works wonderfully for this. If you're using a table, create columns for each philosopher. The rows can represent key aspects of their view, such as their main answer to your question, the reasons they give, and a key quote. If you prefer a more visual approach, a mind map can be very effective. Place your central question in the middle and create a main branch for each philosopher. From each main branch, create smaller sub-branches for their core ideas, supporting arguments and criticisms of other views. This visual organization makes complex ideas much easier to compare at a glance. Finally, you need tools to capture your thoughts. A simple notebook or journal is perfect for this. Use it to jot down notes, summarize arguments in your own words, and record interesting quotes. Flashcards can also be a great tool. On one side, write a philosopher's name and a concept, like say Plato's theory of forms. On the other side, write a brief explanation. These tools aren't just for storage, they are active learning instruments. The act of writing things down helps to solidify them in your memory and forces you to process what you are reading. Keep your tools simple and accessible so you can focus on the ideas themselves. Let's try a simple example to see how this works in practice. We'll take the question, what is the self? This is a fundamental puzzle that has intrigued thinkers across the globe for millennia. We will invite 4 very different philosophers to our discussion: Plato from ancient Greece, David Hume from 18th century Scotland, the Buddha from ancient India, and Søren Kierkegaard from 19th century Denmark. By placing their views side by side, we can see how a single question can lead to profoundly different answers, each shedding light on a different facet of the problem. This exercise shows us that there is rarely a single, simple answer in philosophy. Plato, our first guest, would argue that the true self is the immortal soul. He believed the soul is a rational, non-physical entity that is separate from our fleeting, imperfect body. For Plato, the self is something permanent and eternal that exists before birth and continues after death. Our physical experiences and emotions are just shadows. The real you is your reasoning mind, your soul, striving to remember the world of perfect forms. So, according to Plato, to know yourself is to turn away from the distractions of the physical world and focus on intellectual and spiritual contemplation. His self is a stable, unchanging essence. Next, we turn to David Hume, who would offer a radically different perspective. Hume was an empiricist, meaning he believed all knowledge comes from sensory experience. When he looked inward to find his self, he found nothing but a constant stream of perceptions, thoughts, feelings, memories, and sensations. He famously concluded that the self is not a single unified thing, but a bundle of these perceptions, constantly changing and flowing. For Hume, there is no permanent soul or core identity holding everything together. The self is more like a story we tell ourselves by connecting these fleeting experiences, but it has no real substance. The Buddha, speaking from an ancient Eastern tradition, would present a view that resonates with Hume's, yet has its own unique flavor. Buddhist philosophy teaches the concept of anatta, or no self. Like Hume, the Buddha argued that there is no permanent, independent self to be found. What we mistake for a self is just a temporary combination of physical and mental components that are in a constant state of flux. Grasping for a permanent self, the Buddha taught, is a primary source of suffering. Liberation, or nirvana, is achieved by understanding and accepting this truth of impermanence and interconnectedness. Finally, Søren Kierkegaard introduces a deeply personal and subjective dimension. As an existentialist, he wasn't interested in defining the self as a substance or a bundle of perceptions. Instead, he saw the self as something you must create through your choices and commitments. For Kierkegaard, the self is not something you find, but something you become. It is a project, a task. You build your identity through the passionate, subjective leaps of faith you make in your life. The self is defined by its relationship with the world and with God, and it is forged in the fires of personal responsibility and choice. After you have gathered and organized the different perspectives, the final and most important step is reflection. This is where you move from being a student to being a philosopher in your own right. Look at your notes, your table, or your mind map. Ask yourself which arguments you find most convincing and why. Where do the philosophers agree, even if they use different language? What are the most significant points of disagreement? Try to identify the underlying assumptions that lead each thinker to their conclusion. This critical reflection is not about picking a winner, but about understanding the landscape of the debate more deeply. The best way to crystallize your reflections is to write a short synthesis. This isn't just a summary of what everyone said, it's your own take on the conversation. Start by restating the original question, then explain the main positions, highlighting the key contrasts. Finally, and this is the crucial part, add your own thoughts. Do you think one view is stronger than the others? Can you combine ideas from different philosophers to create a more satisfying answer? Writing this down forces you to clarify your own position and to articulate your reasons for holding it. It transforms passive learning into an active process of intellectual construction. This method of study does more than just teach you facts. It fundamentally changes how you think. By constantly comparing and contrasting ideas, you are training your brain to see connections, to analyze arguments, and to appreciate nuance. This is far more effective for long-term memory than simply memorizing definitions. When you understand how Hume's view of the self is a reaction against ideas like Plato's, both views become more memorable and meaningful. You are not just storing isolated pieces of information, you are building a flexible and interconnected web of knowledge. This web is stronger and more durable than a simple list of facts could ever be. Ultimately, the goal of studying philosophy in this way is to build your own mental architecture. You are not just renting ideas from great thinkers, you are using their materials to construct your own framework for understanding the world. This process builds intellectual confidence and independence. It empowers you to approach new questions with a structured method for thinking them through. You learn that philosophy is not about finding a final definitive answer, but about engaging thoughtfully in the timeless conversation about life's biggest questions. You are building not just knowledge, but wisdom.